The Economist.
Hello and welcome to The Intelligence from The Economist. I'm your host, Rosie Blore. Every weekday we provide a fresh perspective on the events shaping your world. US election campaigns tend to be a little like children's playgrounds. Endless name-calling, followed by all the reasons why you'd never want to be part of the other person's gang. The arrival of Kamala Harris led to a brief pause in that. But now, the attacks are ramping up again. And Simon Verity had stone in his heart. He spent his career sculpting it, carving it and cutting it, honing skills that others had practiced for centuries. Our obituaries editor celebrates his life. First up, though. Two months ago, French politics was thrown into crisis after a snap general election called by President Emmanuel Macron left no party with a clear majority. Since then, Macron has been scrabbling to find a new prime minister who might be able to pull together a government from three fundamentally clashing factions in the new National Assembly. Yesterday, he found one.
Il faudra enfin beaucoup d'écoute, beaucoup de respect.
Standing outside the Prime Minister's office, Michel Barnier accepted his new role and spoke of listening and respect for all political forces.
Ils sont représentés. Et je vais m'y atteler dès ce soir.
I'm going to get to work this evening, he told reporters. And he has a huge task ahead of him.
The choice of Michel Barnier is a surprising one.
Sophie Pedder is our Paris bureau chief.
He's a seasoned politician. He's 73. He comes from the Haute-Savoie region of the Alps. And he's a veteran of the centre-right Republicans Party. He's served as a minister in various governments in the past. And I think he is perhaps best known in the UK, at least, as the former chief European Union Brexit negotiator. But he has got his work cut out because he is now going to be trying to form a government with three competing minority blocs in Parliament, and that is not going to be easy.
It's been nearly 2 months since the second round of the election in which there was no clear winner. As you say, we've got these three competing blocs. Why has it taken so long for Macron to decide to choose his PM?
Well, I think what Macron was trying to do, and it is in line with the French constitution, which gives the president the power to nominate the prime minister, to appoint the prime minister, is to find somebody who would not immediately fall at the first hurdle. He wanted to have a government that would be stable, that would survive no confidence votes in Parliament. And with three minority blocs, that's incredibly difficult because whoever you look at, they could have been voted down. And that was what Macron was testing. He was holding meetings. It was like a merry-go-round of potential prime ministers who were parading in and out of the Élysée Palace. And Michel Barnier was not Macron's first choice. He has, in fact, been a critic of the president in the past. I remember one interview in which he described the president's exercise of power as solitary and arrogant. But he is compatible with the president in many respects. He's pro-European, he's well-known abroad, and I think will reassure the markets as well as French business, which is important at the moment. And now his job is to try and form what Macron has requested, and that is a unifying government.
As you say, he's supposed to form a unifying government. He is on the right, and it was really France's left wing that seemed to have the advantage in the election. So why have we got someone who's from the centre-right?
Well, this is the question that the left is asking, obviously. The Left-Wing Alliance, which is made up of four parties in France and reaches from the Socialists and the Greens all the way to the sort of hard left of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, they have stuck together all the way through the election period and the aftermath. They are the biggest bloc in Parliament, although nearly 100 seats short of a majority, and they consider that they won the election, therefore that their candidate should be Prime Minister. And they're obviously up in arms about this decision because, in their eyes, they they win the election, and the next prime minister is someone from the party that came fourth in that election, who's from the centre-right. So I think in some respects this reflects the fact that France is not used to the concept of kind of cross-party coalition governments. This won't be a strictly formal coalition, but it will be a government that is going to have to bring together figures from different parties. And the left doesn't like that. The left has stuck from the beginning to its line that it won and its programme should be implemented in its entirety without any concessions.
L'élection a donc été volée au peuple français. Le message a été nié.
The left is talking about a stolen election. They're very angry. They've already called for protests on Saturday, September 7th. And this is going to be a story that runs and runs on the left and will make it difficult, if not necessarily mathematically in Parliament, but it will make the political climate very difficult for Michel Barnier to operate in.
And is the choice of someone on the right then supposed to sort of almost take the sting out of Marine Le Pen's party, either in Parliament or with voters even?
In some respects, Marine Le Pen has become a sort of arbitrator in this unprecedented quest for a new prime minister because she is the leader of the third biggest bloc in Parliament. And in a sense, that has given her a sort of veto right, which makes a lot of people in the centre and the centre-right and the left quite uncomfortable. But it is the reality of this new Parliament. And it means that Michel Barnier, who comes from the centre-right, in a sense, is a compromise candidate because he doesn't irritate the far right in the way that other options from the centre-right had done. And this is why it is a somewhat controversial appointment. Michel Barnier, during the primary for the Republicans Party back in 2021, took a very hard line on immigration. And in that sense, if that is what it takes to keep the hard right from voting down this government, that makes some, even in Mr. Macron's party, quite uncomfortable.
What is Barnier actually going to have to do? I mean, obviously, we've been waiting a couple of months for a prime minister. What are the first tasks at hand?
Well, the very first thing he's going to have to do is put together a budget, and the time is running out for that. It has to be presented to Parliament on October the 1st. That's just a few weeks away. And France's public finances are in a perilous state. The outgoing finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, this week conceded that the budget deficit this year is going to reach 5.6%. That is way over the European Union's rule, which is 3%, and it's over even the government's expected outcome for this year. So budget cuts are in order. That is not going to please anybody, certainly not the left, but not even the right either. And this means that the first task for the new prime minister is pretty much the most unpleasant task of all, and that is finding savings and cuts to the budget at a time when nobody wants to see anything of the sort.
And when we spoke just after the election, you said the election result was really just a recipe for chaos, partly because there was no clear result, and partly because we'd never had a situation where the prime minister might be at variance with the president. How do you expect that to play out in the coming months?
Well, it's a good question because this isn't a scenario we've ever really seen. It's not, strictly speaking, cohabitation, which is what the French call it when you have different parties in power in the presidency and in the government. It's something a little bit more blurred than that. And Michel Barnier will want to be his own man. He will want to make his own decisions. There's going to be some interesting discussions upcoming about the nominations to various ministries. Emmanuel Macron is someone who likes to keep his hand on decision-making in France. He's well known for that, and it will be quite difficult for him, I suspect, to let that go. So it will be a sort of, as the French call it, a rapport de force. That's to say, a kind of balance of power between them as they try and work out whether this is really a moment of cohabitation and with some tension between them, or whether this is, in a sense, in continuity with the previous government that was run by Gabriel Attal. But we're really in uncharted territory with this sort of a government with an extremely unstable and difficult parliament to manage. So I think whichever way it goes, it's going to be difficult for both the president and the prime minister over the coming months.
Sophie, thank you so much. Great to talk to you as always.
Oh, thanks, Rosie. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Wow.
In July, Donald Trump left the Republican National Convention on a high.
Friends, delegates, and fellow citizens, I stand before you this evening with a message of confidence, strength, and hope.
He'd just survived an assassination attempt, and the party was hailing him as anointed by God. In the race for the White House, he was the clear front runner against Joe Biden, whose polling and fundraising had collapsed after a dreadful debate performance.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
The emergence of Kamala Harris reset the contest. As Donald Trump struggled to adjust to his articulate, youthful new opponent, the polls narrowed. But now the Republican campaign is back on form. The race is entering its final stages, and the strategy is clear. Attack, attack, attack.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Both of the major party conventions are over. We have our presidential and vice presidential slate, and now we've entered the final 2 months.
Adam O'Neill is The Economist's Washington correspondent.
And Donald Trump, he was a little uneven when Kamala Harris first entered the race, but he's sort of got back into his groove, and his strategy is really coming into shape now. And that strategy is to attack Kamala Harris relentlessly.
So tell me what you've seen of Trump's strategy of attacking Kamala Harris, and what have we seen in the ads?
Donald Trump's old strategy was to say Joe Biden was old, corrupt, and really bad at his job. Kamala Harris is 59 years old. She doesn't have the baggage that Joe Biden does, but she is his number two. So essentially what Donald Trump has done is transplant his old attacks on Joe Biden onto Kamala Harris.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us. Under Harris, over 10 million illegally here.
Before it was Joe Biden has let 10 million illegal immigrants into America. Now it's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have worked together to let 10 million illegal immigrants into America.
And news reports have now confirmed Biden didn't act alone. Kamala Harris was part of the incompetence and failure.
He focuses a lot on migrant crime, on chaos at the border.
As vice president, Kamala Harris decimated the U.S. economy and worked to undo the prosperity President Trump built.
Also mentions inflation, chaos abroad. Recently, they've been fighting with each other over the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
She's weak, failed, and dangerously liberal.
And he's essentially tying Kamala Harris to anything that's gone wrong in the world in the past 4 years.
It always seems that US campaigns are about attacking. So how does that compare to the Harris campaign? What's Kamala Harris doing?
Well, if you look at, let's say, just the past week that led up to this recent rally that Donald Trump had in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, more than half of the money that was spent on television advertising was by the Trump campaign or these groups that are loosely affiliated with the Trump campaign called super PACs. And all of their ads were negative. They were hitting Kamala Harris as an out-of-touch leftist, as an incompetent vice president. Harris, on the other hand, she had a little less than half, I think about 43% of the ad spending, her and her allied groups. They really focused on biographical information, and it was sort of an extension of her Democratic National Convention speech.
She grew up in a middle-class home. She was the daughter of a working mom. And she worked at McDonald's while she got her degree.
This is who I am. I grew up in the middle class. I'm a good person. Lots of platitudes about opportunity and hope and helping people.
Donald Trump has no plan to help the middle class. Just more tax cuts for billionaires. Being president is about who you fight for. And she's fighting for people.
Now, don't get me wrong. They're still perfectly willing to criticize Donald Trump. And I think that they believe, and probably tens of millions of Americans agree with them, that there's plenty of material to go around when it comes to criticizing Donald Trump. But right now, they're really focused on introducing the American people to who this person is. And even though she's been vice president for the better part of 4 years, people are looking at her differently, and they understand that it's important to reintroduce her to the American people.
And what do we know about how the Republican strategy is working? Is it winning over undecided voters?
Donald Trump really won the 2016 election by tens of thousands of votes. And 2020 was also extremely close. I believe Biden won by something like 44,000 votes in 3 swing states. So when it's that granular, it's sort of impossible to know how are the 100,000 or so people in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Georgia, what are they making of all of this? we can look at some of the data, and Kamala Harris, her goal essentially is to rebuild the Joe Biden 2020 coalition. And if you look at polling data, again, we'll find out on November 6th how accurate it was. But if we're to believe the polling, when Joe Biden was running this year, he couldn't rebuild the coalition that he had 4 years ago. Kamala Harris has improved from where Joe Biden was a couple of months ago, but she also has not reached the same level of support among voters under 30, Black voters, or Hispanic voters. And they're still voting for Democrats by large margins. But if Donald Trump can eat away at those margins 5 to 10 percentage points, that could make the election when you're talking about an election that will be decided by tens of thousands of votes.
And has anyone actually worked out whether negative advertising really does have an effect on voters?
Political consultants sure seem to think it does, and they're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on negative advertising. But if you talk to political scientists, this is a debate that's been raging for a long time. There's mixed evidence. And after this election, people are going to be debating for a very long time whether Trump's ad barrage or his shift on abortion or the way that Kamala Harris prosecuted her case against him, all of those things in an election that's this close will be up for debate, just as they were in 2016 and 2020 when we try to figure out how this thing ended and why it came out the way it did.
And Adam, we've got 9 weeks left. Is there any sense that the Democrats will change tack and go more negative?
I would be shocked if they didn't. And to be clear, they're introducing Kamala Harris, but she's not holding back at all. In her rallies, she's sharply critical of Donald Trump. There's no, oh, we're both good people, we just have a different philosophy for how to help the country. She's made clear she thinks he's a bad guy. He would end American democracy. He would destroy the country. Everything he touches is evil. That's a paraphrase, of course, but it's really not that far off. So I would not be shocked at all if they went negative. They'll continue to have their own inspiring, positive message, painting Kamala Harris in a very positive light, but I don't think they're going to hold back at all on Donald Trump.
Adam, thank you so much. Fascinating race. Fascinating as ever to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
And you can hear more about the race for the White House on Checks and Balance, our weekly show on US politics, which we're making free to all listeners throughout September. Every week, John Prideaux and his co-hosts examine one big theme. Today, they're looking at foreign policy.
The first thing you would notice about Simon Verity was his hair.
Anne Rowe is The Economist's obituaries editor.
It stood out in wild grey corkscrews from his head, as if he'd gelled it particularly fiercely. It was in fact accumulated stone dust, which had got so thick that he could never entirely wash it out. And the same dust liberally covered his ragged clothes and his shoes. And he liked to think that when he walked down the street, he would look like an apparition. Inside that wild-looking head, he carried secrets, the same secrets that Masons had kept close in the 13th century. Which were the rules of architectural proportion and how you could balance tons of cut stone so delicately that they could look like the branches of trees. His tools, too, were like those used in the Middle Ages. He worked only with a hammer, a chisel, and a mallet. And when you heard him up on the face of some cathedral, it sounded like a woodpecker, tap, 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 tap. 1 blow a second was what he reckoned. After about 2 hours, he would have to take a break, but then he could go on for 8 or 10 hours, hammering at the stone, revealing the forms that lay inside it. He was chosen by both bishops and princes to do commissions for them. His first work in England was at cathedrals of Canterbury, Wells, and Exeter. But he became most famous for working on the great west portal called the Portal of Paradise at St. John the Divine in Manhattan. Besides this cathedral work, he also did quite a lot of more whimsical things. He carved whales for Charles III, now King Charles when he was Prince of Wales. He carved a giant teacup made of broken crockery for Elton John. And he restored the ancient art of making grottos. He was also intrigued by mosaic, and he did a particularly large piece for the city of New York called Gorgeous Mosaic, which was how Mayor David Dinkins had referred to the city. And for that, he used thousands and thousands of pieces of stone and glass, 40 or 50 different sorts of stone. The glass was mostly from Murano outside Venice, but he also used bits from some brand new plate glass doors that had shattered in the building where he was working. He was happy to use anything that came his way. His chief love, though, was stone itself. He left school rather discontented, not knowing what he was going to do. He didn't want to try for Oxbridge. His family had been a dynasty of architects, but he didn't want to go into that line. After 1988, his great work was in New York, and he moved there to live, on the Great West Portal, the Portal of Paradise at St. John the Divine. There he had to cut from blocks of limestone, the figures of 31 Old Testament prophets. So he coaxed out of the stone Abraham and Sarah, Joshua, Simeon, Daniel, Elijah and Elisha. And he based them on the faces of friends and neighbors in New York. Daniel, of the Lion's Den, was actually Daniel who worked on the cathedral staff. And Simeon was a man called George who ran a coffee shop across the road. He liked to think that medieval people had known that they were building blocks in a greater whole, and that the whole community would come together in the building of a cathedral. And he hoped that by including actual Manhattanites in the statues, he was helping them to put their egos aside and realize that they were part of a common whole. He also hoped to encourage the flow of energy in the cathedral. He was always intrigued by the flow of water across rocks, and that was why he had built so many grottos. But also he was intrigued by the passage of time, by the way people walked across paving stones. He was aware too that he added what seemed a larger purpose to the Portal of Paradise, the same purpose that medieval people would have understood, that when you passed through this portal, as he could, as anyone could, if they lived as they should, then they would be transformed.
Anne Rowe on Simon Verity, who has died aged 79. Tomorrow's edition of The Weekend Intelligence is brought to you by our former host, Ore Ogunbiyi, a story of how Nigerian women were lured thousands of miles away from their homes and families. But that's all for today. The show's editors are Chris Impey and Jack Gill. Our deputy editor is John Joe Devlin, and our sound designer is Will Rowe. Our senior producers are Rory Galloway and Sarah Larniuk. Our senior creative producer is William Warren. Our producers are Maggie Kadifa and Benji Guy. and our assistant producer is Henrietta McFarlane. We'll all see you back here tomorrow.